Afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's leadership and coaching segment, Korean executive coach who helps quiet leaders to regain confidence and clarity so they can advance in their careers. Please welcome to the show, Cecile Hemery. How are you doing, Cecile?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you, Kevin. How are you yourself?
Good. I'm having a good, we're recording this on a Monday, so having a good, productive Monday. So I'm excited to have this conversation. But before we charge into that conversation, don't you want to just give us some background on who you are and more about what you do?
Yes. So I'm a career and executive coach. As you mentioned, I help quiet leaders. I came into this career after working for 15 years in the tech industry, and realizing as an introvert, and as a sensitive person, there were some challenges that I was working through, which felt like really big barriers for me, but didn't need to be. And at some point, I decided to, jump out of this career and help people who, like me, wanted to figure out how to be themselves in the work environment.
Fantastic. I love that. And I love that, so you come from a position that you've experienced, that you have, real life experience about what sensitivity means. But let's unpack that. I mean, conversations like, can you share some insight on the sensitivity, particularly among quiet leaders, influencing their decision-making processes and behaviors in today's world? And if we look at, today's world, there is, I think sensitive people will probably relate more to the statement, but I think sensitivity, people who are sensitive, kind of feel the energy of the current world and the current environment that we live in as extremely hyper intense kind of environments, right? But I mean, don't you want to just unpack that a little bit for us? Because most people don't think that, it's something that I struggle with, because I'm on, doing this often. But essentially, all my life, I've been, my brother always made fun of that, because he'd say, stop being so sensitive. You're always so emotional. And I was just experiencing the world in a different way, right? And I know that today, but but please, don't you want to unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah. I mean, you shared a lot of bits into that, so there's quite a lot to unpack to, and thank you for opening yourself to sharing your own experience. So like the way I see this is like there are different aspects, to being sensitive or being quiet. If we like there's introversion, which is around how we manage our energy, and like allowing ourselves, to be at our best when we're alone, like finding our energy when we're alone. And like there's this sensitivity, which I think I would describe it as, having an inner life, that is very, very rich, and having access to, understand some things like intuitively, and like having it like very clear as a picture in your mind, but not necessarily finding the words to explain what that looks like to others, or how you came to this knowing, and which can create like a lot of frustration, because and not being also aware that others might not see those dots because you see them so clearly. So how can other people not see them? So and it's really like a posture communication, of like two entirely different way of seeing the world and of experiencing the world. Like not imagine that someone else's experiences can be that different. And so I think that's a very big component, to miscommunication and misunderstandings, that can happen in the workplace, of just like understanding that for the sensitive person to share more of what's happening inside, and for others to be able to explore that there is this struggle from going to what is to explaining what is, and that's sometimes words are not enough to explain it. There needs to be this additional something to pass it through. So like, how do we create communication between these two entirely ways of approaching things?
Mm.
And I think you shared it. It's like there is a lot of judgment around the world, around the word of being sensitive, because
Yeah.
the way you said, like you share your experience with your brother, it sounds like it's a bad thing. It sounds like it's being
Yeah.
weak. But the reality is that it's not. And I guess for people who may be less sensitive, it can be what's the word? Scary, to see someone who is in touch, with their emotions, or is in touch with all that kind of thing. And that, what's scary, what we don't understand, we tend to label as something bad. And so again, we're talking about this misunderstanding between people who have an entirely different experience of life. But it would be interesting to put back some focus on what are the strengths of being sensitive, and actually being able to tap into those things that may be hidden from the view, and bring their value back in the world is important.
I think what stands out for me is when you say sometimes we don't have the words to explain, and I relate to that so much, because very often, because of my intuition, because I feel
Yeah.
my way around life and people and situations, what I can't usually articulate well enough is what it is that I'm feeling.
Mhm.
And very often when you are not able to articulate it in the way that's sufficient for people to understand, they just think you're being difficult, or you're scared, or you're oversensitive, or all of these labels, right? And maybe there's a consciousness and an awareness of leaders to start asking, okay, cool, if you can't articulate what you're trying to say, what feeling do you attach to that?
Mhm.
Right? Because that would then support it in a different context and a different frame. And I've often found that when I support what I'm sharing with the feeling of something, it changes the narrative slightly, and people become more aware of what I am trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really sounds like finding your own way to communicate, rather than feel like you have to use the communication ways of others, like to find your own, and your own is through expressing what you're feeling, and through expressing your emotions, which other might discard as not being relevant. So that is exactly what it is, like finding your own way through things, and finding your own definition of how do you communicate, and having the picture of what are the best words for you to describe that picture, what are the best emotions, what are the best colors, what are the best movements. And I'm
Mm.
moving my hands, as we say this. But it's rather than, because like what also you said is that that's something that feeds on itself, because like if you start being your natural way, then you get those comments that you're being oversensitive and whatnot, and that kind of fits itself, that like you limit yourself so that you don't get this comment. And at some point, even if you don't get these comments, you're still going to limit yourself. And a life where you're constantly limiting yourself when you're communicating something that you deeply care about, or that you're deeply convinced about, is highly frustrating, and
Yeah.
isn't always necessary to limit yourself. So finding your own truth, like your own version of it, and finding your own way to communicate it is the way through.
I think just as while you're talking through it, I think such an important point to recognize is we're not saying that everybody in the world now has to understand that like sensitive leaders are sensitive and we must make space for them as well. It's more of a case of going, if you recognize that you are a sensitive person, if you recognize that you do experience life and business differently to most people, let it then become a conversation that you have with self or with a partner or a coach to kind of recognize your strengths, as you mentioned earlier, and see the sensitivity as a strength rather than say, oh, you're hypersensitive or you're oversensitive, or it becoming or negating your leadership or your ability as a leader. Rather to say, no, I have aptitude and ability far greater than maybe you do in a certain context, based on the fact that I do have more sensitivity and I experience it in a very different way. And I think that's the sort of differentiator, that it's not trying to compensate for sensitive people, but rather to see sensitive people as people with strengths that other people don't have strengths in, perhaps.
Yeah, and that it's the combination of those strengths that will bring the best, to the world, to a company, to whatever environment. You need both. You need the depths of the sensitivity and attunement to, what's lying in the deep, and you need the other strengths, as well. You need both for the world to thrive, for a company to thrive. And so it's a very valid point. And I think it's also important to recognize that as a sensitive person, when you're going against who you naturally are and how you're naturally receive and share, is not doing yourself and others a favor, because you limiting yourself with have an impact on how you perceive yourself and how the emotions that you are feeling this sense of frustration, feeling that something isn't right, feeling that maybe you're missing out on something. That's going to have a huge impact of you. That's going to impact how you communicate, and that's going to impact the quality of your relationship with others, because they're going to sense also that something isn't quite right. So and you're not being you. It's silly to say, but when you're not going towards your natural gifts or your integral strength, so knowing that in yourself will make you a better person, because from the get-go, otherwise you're just judging that who you are naturally and what your greatest strengths are not what is going to make you good at your job, is not what is going to make people want to work with you or listen to your ideas or whatever. So you see that there's this whole judgment that you're putting around it, and to you have to remove those from yourself first. And that's when having those conversations with the people around you or with the coach or doing that work of self-awareness on yourself can allow you to remove those judgments on yourself first, so that you can show up to others without them, and bring your best rather than bring your limitations.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cecile, in your work supporting quiet leaders, what types of strategies or practices have you found work most effective in helping leaders, sensitive leaders, navigate their unique traits and abilities? What are some of those practices that you use with leaders?
Well, I think having this conversation, and having that awareness of what's really going on and what it is that you are bringing into the conversation, I think that's really the first step. Because especially if you're sensitive, and if you're introverted, then you're going to have a very large amount of information going through your brain. And that's how the brain of introverts work. It goes through every experience before, and and go back and try to analyze everything, but then realize that you're bringing all of that to a situation today, and that is a lot of weight. And so just to unpack those conversations, to know what it is that you have a tendency to carry, and what is this particular thing that you're dealing with today, and separate the two.
Mm.
And I think as a first step, that's very important to be aware of that, so that you can be in the conversations you're having without that weight, and without adding unnecessary again, limitations or judgments or automatic behaviors that will not serve you or the other person in that moment. So I think that's really the first step. And also because if you let go of that weight, then you're less in a position to want to defend yourself from potential attack.
Yes. So, I mean, and I love that you start there, because I think self-awareness is, we tend to, if you are a sensitive person, a sensitive leader, we tend to dismiss it as something negative, or we don't step into the strengths of that. So allowing it to exist and allowing for it to be what it is. Do you find that sometimes it's a tactic, or perhaps a practice that you can inform people that you are hypersensitive? Or because I found that when people do that, people immediately go to a negative connotation. How does one take that kind of strength that is what it is, that introversion and that you're sensitive person, and kind of allow it to be in a busy world, in a corporate environment? How do you find that blend?
Well, I don't necessarily think that is something that you need like to put a label on. Like as stating like here's what I am. But there are some things that you can do around stating like, how do I work best? And like having the conversation of ways of working. Like if everything is done in groups, for example, maybe advocating for one-to-ones, or like some really down to earth tips, or like if everybody usually go to meetings, and there's never any agenda, having an agenda, so you have time to ask for an agenda, so you have time to process, and think about what you're gonna say, and just it's just a matter of showing who you are and not being afraid of it, rather than telling, and figuring out with the other people that you're working with what works best for them and what works best for you. Because it's not about the world, making it easier for you. It's about you and others finding the best way to work together, and creating a conversation around that is the best first step. And setting boundaries around what's not working for you, and what's not allowing you to contribute in the best way you could is a part of that. So it's more showing, and working together rather than stating.
And I think what also sort of occurs to me is how each individual also consumes and uses information differently. So if we looked at, like some people are very visual, some people are very auditory, some people are very kinesthetic, so and some people are thinkers, right? So they have to take the information in, go away with the information, and come back. So tying into the ways of working, I think that's sort of very important, because if you know that, I know for me that if I'm learning anything, it has to be auditory and visual, and predominantly auditory more than visual, because if it's not auditory, if I just have to read it, I struggle to learn it. So I know that's my learning preference, right? So it becomes a preference to how do you receive information better, and what works better for you as well. And that too in itself speaks to this then becomes a strength. Then I understand, if you're sending me information, please send it a voice note on WhatsApp, because I know that I'm probably going to pay attention to it more likely than a long email, So I think it's the self-awareness ties right back into that ways of working, because then you're managing people's expectations a little bit better, but you're also creating best ways of work for yourself in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm also for me, I need that combination of visual and audio, and like, but it's very difficult for me when things are only audio, because then I will not, everything will not compute. I need some visual element for it to compute. But that reminds me, when I was in the work environment, where I always felt very self-conscious, because when people would ask for numbers, like I would never remember them. Like I knew exactly where they were on my Excel file in my computer, and like but I had a lot of judgment about myself in those moments when I wasn't able to give the number of the spots, and others were, and I was like, "What's wrong with me? I'm bad at my job. These are very important numbers. Why don't I know them by heart?" And actually, I realized today, like, well, actually, I didn't need to just to look good in a meeting to know these numbers by heart, as long as I know where they are. So, like, having those conversations, like, hey, or just, I mean, now you can just bring up your computer in a meeting, but what is the strength of yours and what isn't, and accept it. Because if I couldn't remember those numbers, but actually I could very quickly make links between things, and see the bigger picture in an instant, which wasn't something that everybody could do to the same extent in those meetings. So, like, really seeing what's the difference.
I think as you say that, I always refer to the quiet person in the room. And, I do a lot of training and I do a lot of coaching sessions and facilitation. And you do invariably have people in the room that are just quiet and they kind of observe. And, often people will have experiences of someone like that. And immediately, I'll address it straight up front so that the quiet people in the room don't feel like they're not contributing. And I'll say, guys, just because someone's quiet doesn't mean they're not thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So always remember that they might be, you'll often find that people who are quiet and observing are putting together things that you didn't even think about, because very often, and I'm making a generalization, I'm aware of that, people who are loud and extroverted, they ramble, and sometimes they put their own foot in their own mouth kind of thing, and they might be saying the wrong thing, where an introverted person is thinking, I wonder, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? So they usually, and that's just my experience of it, someone who actually holistically takes the views into consideration rather than just throwing everything at the wall.
And I guess in that respect, it's great to advocate when you're in a position that you can. I know that that's something that can be very scary for some of my clients, so it's not always something that they feel comfortable doing.
Mm.
And but I think what helps also, that can be like having an ally in the room, someone who and who can give you the torch, so to give you the space. So because for the quiet people, what's usually missing in the room is the space to talk, because there's a lot of things that comes into play, like, am I interrupting, is it polite, or because while the extroverted person might be rambling and and not necessarily just being thinking out loud, the introvert person, when she's going to talk, she's going to want to say the right thing. It's going to be very important for her to say the right thing, and so just generally able to make space, allow for silences to happen, because the quiet person will not jump on the silences. They will wait until the silence has settled, and then they will go for it. So having allies to give the torch, to say, hey, here is you now. Another thing is that contributing isn't always providing information or saying something. It can also be questions, and questions are a lot easier for quiet people to ask. So asking question has a lot of value and is an easy way to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that, but before we give them tips and tricks, one of the things I just want to sort of touch on, which we started with, is just intuition. How do we utilize intuition and even symbolism to understand ourselves, and or for at least sensitive leaders to understand, what they're going through and how they can tap into that. How do they do that more specifically? Because I mean, self-awareness is a really good one. Asking questions is a really good one. But intuition it's a very untangible. It's an intangible that we can't kind of easily.
Yeah, and like you don't want either like to give like too much power to something that like, is it really something that's of interest in there? But I think like the question for it is curiosity. Like that idea that I'm having, that thing that I'm saying, if this were true, where would it take us? What would happen then? And explore the idea with curiosity and see what will happen then. I mean, from the world of tech, like do a lot of A/B testing, so that's A/B testing is a great way to test the things, because then you can experiment, and say, okay, is there a valid base, for what I'm talking about? It's allowing for the intuition to give it a chance, even if it's not based on pure data. Just allowing inspiration, creativity, like a lot of the great things that we have in the world wouldn't have happened if someone hadn't given it a chance, even if it made no sense at the time. I remember that story about the Walkman. Said like if they had listened to customer research, they would never have done it, because that's not what came out of what people wanted. But they're like, well, actually, let's give it a try and see what happens. So curiosity to me is how to navigate intuition, not believing it blindly, but allowing yourself to be like, hey, what if there's something there? Where would that take me? How can I safely test it and dig and know more about it and explore? And then what does that bring me that I can use and bring to my service, to my team, or to whatever?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, to close today's conversation, because I love this, the sensitive leader. What advice would you have for individuals who do feel underappreciated or overlooked due to their quieter nature? And what are some of those tips and tricks? I mean, we've touched on some of them already, but what advice would you give a quieter leader that feels a little bit underappreciated or overlooked at times?
The advice I would say is that don't hide in your shell, because the more you perceive this judgment, the more you are going to go into your shell, and the more you're going to receive this judgment, and it's just a loop that isn't going to serve you. And not everybody is going to have this judgment. So like, give the world a chance, I would say. We were talking about curiosity and experiment, and like, give yourself a chance to show yourself out there, to the world, and see what happens. Do it safely, do it in your own pace, but do it and like we said, like to test, like the weight of the judgments that you might have received in the past, all those little comments, all those little phrases, like making you feel that how you are isn't good. Well, they're not necessarily valid. So allow yourself to test out of them from time to time and see what happens. And you might be surprised that actually people will suddenly see you.
And that's because that leans into confidence, and that leans into a bit of your comfort zone, right? So lean into pushing outside of your comfort zone and not be scared, right?
Absolutely. absolutely. Just like knowing yourself, like self-awareness will lead, and experimenting will lead to confidence, because it's hard. Something is hard when you're doing it the first time, the second time, but after a while, it's not that hard. After a while, you get used to it. In my change of career, I had to start networking, again, a lot. And that's been very scary for me at the beginning. And now it's not anymore, because
Well,
I'm
here you are on a podcast having a conversation with me.
just a little bit scared. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. But so give yourself a chance but do it your way. Like find the ways that make it comfortable for you. So, like, for example, if we're talking about networking, how do you network as a quiet leader? I would say, like, arrive early, because you know what? When you arrive early, not everybody's there. So you're not facing a huge room full of people. You're facing a couple of individuals just looking at each other like, who am I going to talk to? That's your chance.
Yes. I love that. Cecile, I love that. Thank you. Guys, she helps quiet leaders to regain confidence and clarity so that you can advance in your career. Cecile Hemery, where is the quickest way for us to get hold of you if we want to find out where to touch base?
Well, LinkedIn is the best place where you can find me. So Cecile Hemery, and you can send me a message or grab my calendar link and book a meeting with me if you want to have a chat.
Fantastic. I love it. Cecile, thank you so much for chatting, and thanks for spending some time with us. I'm all for the sensitive leader. I'm one of them. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
Just for now.
Thank you.